They wheeled the gurney down a narrow hall that smelled of bleach and sorrow. The dog atop it wasn't struggling. He lay still, breathing shallow, his muzzle strapped tight with coarse nylon. A faint tremor passed through one of his hind legs. Not fear, something more worn down than that. Resignation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp angles on his scarred coat. His name, once stenciled in white across a black harness, had long since faded. The clipboard clipped. To the end of the gurney read only, Unit to K911, disqualified. Behind the reinforced window that separated the back corridor from the public adoption floor, a small group of civilians milled about, half-heartedly browsing kennels. Most were distracted by phone screens, noisy children, or the soft-faced puppies that yelped for attention. No one noticed the gurney. No one asked about the dog with the fogged eye and the limp in his stride. Except for Eli. He wasn't part of the crowd. He stood near the back, grease-stained hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the hallway beyond the glass. Mid-40s, built like a truck that had seen too many winters, Eli wore silence like armor. He hadn't come to adopt. He wasn't even sure why he was here. Said it was to drop off a carburetor for the shelter's busted van. But he'd lingered. And when the steel doors opened, and they wheeled that gurney into view, something in his gut turned over. He stared at the dog long and hard. The dog didn't meet his gaze. Not at first. A handler walked beside the gurney, clipboard in hand, face blank. Another opened a side door that led to the evaluation suite, a euphemism that didn't fool anyone. It was where decisions got made, quietly, efficiently, the kind of room built for things people didn't want to witness. Eli moved closer to the glass. The murmur of the crowd dulled behind him. Then the dog's head turned. Their eyes met. It wasn't recognition, not fully, more like a hesitation in the dark, a flicker of memory, buried under drills and commands and smoke. The handler tugged, the gurney forward, but the dog's neck craned slightly, his ears twitching toward the man behind the glass. Eli blinked, his hands twitched in his pockets. Something stirred, not just in the dog, in him. The handler inside began prepping the sedative. He spoke low into a comm device. Unit K911 is prepped. Disqualified due to prior aggression. No viable adoption interest. Proceeding with humane termination. A quiet beep acknowledged the command. And then Eli did something he hadn't done in years. He spoke up. Wait. His voice cracked the air like a dropped wrench. Heads turned. A mother pulled her daughter close. One of the volunteers frowned. The handler on the other side of the glass stopped mid-syringe draw. Wait, Eli said again, stepping forward. That dog. What's his name? The handler looked up, confused. Unit K911. No, Eli said, with a strange certainty. That's not his name. The supervisor, a tired-looking woman with a badge and a clipboard, approached from the side. Sir, this isn't a viewing dog. He's been deemed unfit. He's not unfit, Eli said, his voice gaining weight. He's trained, just broken in ways you can't see on paper. You know this animal. Eli's jaw clenched. Memories pulsed behind his eyes. Desert sand, explosions, barked commands, and a dog with a jagged ear racing through gunfire. I think I do. The room held its breath. Even the children had gone quiet. The handler hesitated, syringe still capped. You want to claim him? Eli nodded once. If he'll come to me. The supervisor raised an eyebrow. He won't. He doesn't trust anyone. Tried to bite 2 handlers last week. Then I'll know I'm wrong, Eli said. The door buzzed open. The gurney was stationary now. The leash had been clipped to a wall bracket for safety. The muzzle stayed on. Eli entered slow, steady. The air was heavy with antiseptic and fear. The dog shifted, muscles tensing. You remember me? Eli said, kneeling just out of range. It was a long time ago. Different sand. Different war. The dog didn't move. I had a partner once, Eli murmured. Looked a lot like you. Smart, fast, saved my life twice, maybe 3 times. He reached into his coat pocket, drew out a tiny metal tag, scuffed, dented, almost forgotten. It had once been a collar tag, the name etched into it, Shadow. The dog's ears lifted, just slightly. Eli set the tag on the floor. The handler tensed. Then Shadow moved. Not a leap, not a charge. A slow, trembling shift forward, one paw, then another. His nose touched the tag. A whine slipped through the muzzle. Eli reached out, one hand open. Shadow lowered his head into the mechanic's palm. The room behind the glass erupted in whispers. The handler stood frozen. The supervisor's pen dropped from her fingers. And for the first time in what felt like years, Eli exhaled. Shadow, he whispered. That's your name, isn't it? The dog leaned into his hand. The trembling stopped. Later there were forms. A waiver, medical warnings, liability clauses. Eli signed them all with an oil-stained thumbprint and a steady hand. When they walked out, the leash was loose. The muzzle hung from Eli's wrist. Shadow's limp was still there, but lighter, like a man stepping off the scaffold and finding ground beneath his feet. Outside, the sun had already begun to set, and neither man nor dog looked back. The first few nights were silent. Shadow lay coiled in the far corner of Eli's cramped garage apartment, eyes open, breath shallow. He didn't bark, he didn't whine. He simply watched, as if trying to decide whether this new cage, less steel, more dust, was any different from the last. Eli left the door open. He left the food close, the water closer. He didn't approach. Trust, he knew, wasn't earned by reaching. It was built by staying. By the 3rd night, the food bowl was empty by morning. Eli ran the shop by day, fixing busted axles and rewiring brake lights, all under the half-lit glow of flickering fluorescent bulbs. Shadow never strayed far. He prowled the edges of the garage, silent as a ghost, a shadow in truth as well as name. Sometimes he lay under the workbench, unmoving for hours. Other times he would simply stand, eyes tracking Eli's every motion, as if waiting for the moment the kindness might vanish. Eli talked to him anyway, not with expectation, just habit. Muttered sentences while tuning carburetors, half-stories while changing tires. He told the dog about old engines and colder nights. He mentioned a sister up north, a back that never healed right, a mechanic's, hands that still remembered holding a rifle. Shadow didn't respond, but Eli noticed the twitch of his ears. The subtle shift of pause when Eli laughed without thinking. It was Maya who broke the silence, both literally and figuratively. She arrived one evening with a vet bag slung over her shoulder, her boots streaked with straw and dirt. She was Eli's closest thing to a friend, though neither of them would call it that. She offered him advice, arguments, and coffee, in that order. "This him?" she asked, crouching to Shadow's level. Eli nodded. "Shadow." Maya studied the dog carefully. "Military trained." "Yeah." "Discharged?" "Same as me." She reached slowly, palm flat. Shadow stiffened but didn't retreat. His nose twitched. Her fingers brushed the edge of his muzzle. "He's running high anxiety," she murmured. "His muscles are still firing like he's expecting to be attacked. That look in his eyes. It's not fear. It's memory." "He's remembering things I'd rather forget," Eli said quietly. She glanced up at him. "You both are." Shadow let her check his limbs, press gently around old scars. She noticed the limp, noted where the muscle had shrunk, and where it hadn't healed right. "He's not dangerous," she said. "Just waiting for someone to give him a reason not to be. Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. Weeks passed like oil through cloth, slow, messy, but steadily absorbing something deep. The dog changed in increments. He stopped flinching at slammed hoods, started following Eli more closely during tasks. He barked once, just once, at a customer who raised his voice too loud. And when Eli bent to retrieve a wrench that had rolled under the tool chest, Shadow's nose bumped his elbow, steadying him with a quiet kind of care. But not all progress was forward. One afternoon, a man in uniform came in to pick up a rebuilt alternator. As soon as the doorbell chimed and Eli looked up, Shadow tensed. The soldier's voice was loud, sharp, echoing commands in tones too similar to old ones. Shadow's growl was low, almost a hum. Then he lunged. Eli caught the leash mid-air, hauling. Shadow back with a strength he hadn't felt in years. The customer stumbled out, spitting curses. Shadow's chest heaved, eyes wild, searching for threats that had long passed. Eli didn't scold. He knelt beside him, heart racing. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're not there anymore." Shadow's growls faded, but the look in his eye didn't soften for hours. That night, Eli sat on the floor beside his bed, legs stretched out, fingers absently turning the dented tag in his hand. "You weren't wrong," he murmured. "Not really. You were doing what you were trained to do." Shadow lay nearby, unmoving. "I did the same. Only difference is, people expected me to stop being a soldier when the uniform came off." His voice cracked. "No one told me how." The dog turned his head, eyes meeting Eli's. In the dim garage light, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a recognition. Two creatures who had been turned into weapons and now were trying to remember how to be something else. The next morning, Eli began the retraining, not as a soldier, but as a partner. He used tools the way he used to use commands. Subtle, patient. He'd tap a wrench 3 times to signal food. A single knock on the toolbox meant stay. A gloved hand lifted, then lowered meant come. At first, Shadow ignored them, but slowly, piece by piece, the dog began to interpret. Again, not from fear, but curiosity. Eli built simple routines. Fetch the dropped socket, guard the back door, sit beside the engine when the customer talked. And when Shadow hesitated, Eli waited, giving him time to choose instead of obey. Maya visited again, watching from the shop's doorway as Shadow nudged a ratchet into Eli's hand. "That's not obedience," she said. "That's trust." Eli didn't look up. "It's a start." By the end of that week, Shadow slept not across the room, but beside Eli's cot. When Eli woke from dreams choked with smoke and static, Shadow was already alert, tail thumping, softly against the floor. One evening, as they locked up, a child walked by on the sidewalk with a balloon tied to his wrist. Shadow froze. Balloons popping had once sounded like gunfire. Eli waited, hand resting lightly on the leash. The balloon bobbed. Shadow didn't flinch. And in that small, silent victory, Eli felt something loosen in his chest. They were still scarred, still limping, still navigating the landmine field of old reflexes and ghost commands. But for the first time in years, neither of them was doing it alone, and that made all the difference. The storm rolled in fast, cracking open the sky like an old wound. It had started with static, on the radio, in the air, in Eli's bones. He felt it in his bad knee, the one that never healed quite right. Maya had left half an hour earlier, promising to return with gauze and flea drops. The dog had been restless all afternoon, pacing near the windows, ears up, tail low. Thunder turned his breath shallow. Eli secured the tools, turned the sign to closed, and clicked off the tar. Lights. "It's just noise, Shadow," he muttered, though the words were mostly for himself. Won't hurt us now. But Noise had memory. For both of them. When the lightning struck the transformer behind the building, the explosion shattered the night. The sound was so sharp and violent it tore through the garage like a war cry. The lights went black. The radio died mid-song. Eli dropped the socket wrench with a metallic clatter. Shadow was gone before the echo faded. The door had been unlatched. Eli had meant to fix the hinge for weeks. It swung open in the blast of wind, and Shadow slipped through the gap like smoke. No leash, no command, just panic and muscle memory. Running. Eli was out the door within seconds, boots splashing into puddles, the downpour stinging his face. "Shadow!" he shouted into the storm. His voice was swallowed by the wind. The streets blurred, headlights smeared through rain. Eli called again, searching alleys and backyards, the past bleeding into the present with every breath. Memories. Struck like lightning, the compound raid, the flashbangs, that same sound, that same vanish, that same fear. He found the dog an hour later, cornered behind the auto scrapyard, near the rusted shell of a burnt-out truck. Shadow stood rigid, body low, teeth bared. His hackles rose like smoke. A young man crouched across from him, holding out a flashlight and muttering nonsense to soothe him. The boy looked no older than 20, clearly terrified. "Step back," Eli warned, approaching slowly. "He won't let me move," the kid whispered. "I think he thinks I'm a threat." "You're not wrong," Eli said softly. "He doesn't see you. He sees the past." The wind rattled loose metal sheets overhead. Thunder growled again. Eli took another step forward. "Shadow!" he called. Calm, but firm. "It's me! Stand down!" The dog didn't budge. Eli dropped to one knee, hands open. "You know who I am. You know where you are. That isn't war anymore. It's just rain." The words hung in the air. Shadow trembled. The boy backed away. Eli stayed still. Another roll of thunder cracked overhead. Shadow barked, a sharp, ragged sound that bordered on a scream. But then his eyes locked with Eli's, and in the flash of lightning that followed, something inside him cracked wide open. He stepped forward. One paw, then two. And then his whole body collapsed into Eli's arms, heavy and shaking. Eli held him, fingers gripping damp fur. "You came back," he whispered. "That's all that matters." They walked home slowly, side by side, the storm softening behind them. The next morning, Maya arrived to find the garage open, a kettle hissing on the stovetop, and Shadow asleep, on an old blanket in the corner, his head resting on Eli's boot. "I heard about last night," she said. Eli didn't look up from the carburetor he was fixing. "He came back." She smiled. "You both did." The story might have ended there. It almost did. But the universe, in its strange way, offered one final test. It was a Tuesday when the sirens began. A gas leak across town. A warehouse in flames. First responders scrambled, and by late afternoon, a call went out to nearby residents for evacuation and help. Maya came by to tell Eli. "I'm going," she said, tossing a first aid kit into her truck. "They need volunteers." Eli didn't answer at first. He looked at Shadow, who now sat alert by the bench, tail sweeping once across the floor. "I've got an old rescue harness in the back," Eli murmured. "Used to fit my partner." Maya raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "No," he admitted. "But he is." They reached the fire ground by dusk. Smoke coiled through the sky like a warning. The street was chaos, sirens, shouting, scorched. Debris. A firefighter recognized Eli. "You trained K9s, didn't you?" Eli nodded. "We've got a girl trapped. Back room. Structure's unstable. We can't risk sending another man in." Shadow stood tall, ears forward. "Send him," Eli said. "With me." The gear came fast. They buckled the harness onto Shadow, The straps still bore old stitching. Eli slid a transponder into the clip, adjusted the makeshift handle. "Same deal, buddy," he whispered. "Find the living. Bring them home." They entered the smoke together. Heat blistered the walls. Beams groaned overhead. The girls' cries were faint, buried under layers of soot and wreckage. Eli moved slow, trusting the dog's nose more than his own sight. Shadow darted forward, then paused. He barked twice. They found her under a metal cabinet, curled and coughing. Eli cleared debris. Shadow stayed beside her, nudging her shoulder with his muzzle, anchoring her to something real. Together, they carried her out. The crowd erupted as the girl emerged, soot-streaked and sobbing, her arms locked around Shadow's neck. No one asked about his past. No one mentioned aggression reports or disqualification papers. They only saw a hero. Later, after the medics left and the crowd dispersed, Eli sat beside his dog in the darkened shop. "You were always more than a weapon," he said softly. "You just needed someone to remind you." Shadow let out a low, tired groan, then rested his head on Eli's knee. The world outside remained unpredictable, loud, sometimes cruel. But in that quiet corner of the garage, there was peace, earned, built slowly, like an engine rebuilt with care. Two souls once discarded, now whole, together.